You're halfway through a spreadsheet you don't care about when your phone vibrates 3 times in a row. Not a call, 3 separate alerts. You ignore the first, glance at the second, and freeze on the third. Global markets have halted. Not dipped, not fluctuated. Halted. Your company's internal system, which you're not supposed to have access to anymore, lights up with a message tagged at the highest classification level you've ever seen. You shouldn't be able to read it. You read it anyway. Continuity Protocol Alpha has failed. You don't understand what that means yet, but you understand what follows. The backup system fails, then the backup to the backup. Then a cascade of automated shutdowns hits infrastructure you've only ever heard about in rumors. Power grids, communications backbones, satellite routing systems. Within minutes, your city loses synchronization with everything else. Clocks drift, signals drop, payment systems freeze. People start noticing. You stand up. Not because you know what to do, but because sitting suddenly feels like a mistake. The fourth alert is a location pin. You go. You don't tell anyone, not your boss, not your family, not even yourself, why you're going. You just follow the coordinates, through checkpoints that shouldn't exist, past guards who check your face against something you can't see, into a facility that doesn't appear on any map you've ever accessed. Nobody explains anything. Nobody stops you either. It's as if your presence has already been decided. They take your phone, they take your watch. They don't take your name, because they already know it. You're led into a room with no windows and one long table. There are 12 empty chairs. Only one is occupied. The man sitting there doesn't introduce himself. He slides a folder across the table. Everyone else is gone, he says. Dead, missing, or unreachable. You don't sit down. You don't open the folder. Everyone? You ask. He nods once. The system that coordinates global decision-making, economic stabilization, conflict containment, disaster response, it relied on a council. Redundancies were built in. They all failed. You're the last viable node. You almost laugh. You don't. I'm not part of any council. You were, he says. You just didn't know it. Now you sit. You open the folder. It's not explanations. It's permissions, authorizations, access keys, layers of control you didn't know existed, each one tied to systems that quietly shape the world. Currency flows, supply chains, intelligence networks, even narrative control mechanisms. Not governments, not corporations. Something that sits above both, coordinating when coordination becomes the difference between stability and collapse. Why me, you ask? Because you were selected years ago, he says. Statistical modeling, psychological profiling, decision pattern analysis. You were one of 12. Now, you're one of 1. You look at the last page. A single line. Assume full control. You don't feel powerful. You feel cornered. What happens if I say no? He doesn't hesitate. Within 72 hours, systems begin failing irreversibly. Within a week, major economies collapse. Within a month, coordinated global response ceases to exist. After that, it's fragmentation. You understand what he's really saying. This isn't a choice. It's a liability transfer. You sign. The pen doesn't feel heavy, but the moment does. The second your signature is complete, the room changes. Screens activate. Data floods in. Not summaries, raw inputs. Live conflicts, financial free falls, infrastructure vulnerabilities, intelligence reports with no filters. Congratulations, the man says. You run the world. There's no ceremony, no transition, just immediate decisions. The first crisis hits before you can even process the second. A major power grid in a densely populated region is destabilizing. If it collapses, hospitals fail, transportation halts, millions are at risk. There's a fix, but it requires rerouting energy from another region already under strain. If you divert it, you save one area and push another closer to blackout.
You ask for alternatives. There aren't any fast enough. You realize something immediately. Every decision here is a trade-off. There are no clean solutions, only distributions of damage. You choose. You reroute the energy. You save the first region. The second experiences rolling blackouts. Not catastrophic, but not harmless either. Reports come in. Accidents, disruptions, economic loss. You mark them, not because you can fix them now, but because you'll need to remember what your decisions cost. You don't get time to reflect. The next issue is financial. Markets are frozen. Confidence is collapsing. If trading resumes without intervention, panic will trigger a cascade that no system can absorb. You're given options. Inject liquidity at an unprecedented scale, enforce temporary controls, or let the market correct itself and accept the consequences. You know what correct itself means. It means collapse. You authorize the injection. Trillions move in seconds. Artificial stability returns. It's not real, but it buys time. Time is the only currency that matters here. Hours pass, or maybe minutes. Time stops behaving normally when every second contains consequences. You start building a framework, not because you're confident, but because without one, you'll drown in reaction. You categorize decisions: immediate survival, short-term stabilization, long-term risk. You assign thresholds. You delegate where you can. But you quickly learn that delegation doesn't remove responsibility. It just delays when it returns to you.
The man who brought you here disappears. Not physically at first, but functionally. He stops speaking unless you ask direct questions. Eventually, even that stops. You understand the message. There's no higher authority. There's no one to confirm your choices. There's only you and the outcomes. Days blur into each other. You don't leave the facility. You don't sleep properly. You learn faster than you thought possible, not because you're exceptional, but because the alternative is failure at a scale you can't accept. You begin to see patterns. Conflicts aren't isolated. They're interconnected. Economic instability feeds political tension, which feeds conflict, which feeds resource strain, which loops back into economics. You're not solving problems. You're managing systems of problems that evolve as you touch them. You make your first major mistake in the third week. An intelligence report indicates a potential escalation between two nations. It's not confirmed, but the risk is high. You decide to intervene preemptively. Apply pressure, disrupt communication channels, introduce uncertainty that might delay action. It works. Too well. The disruption is interpreted as aggression. The escalation you were trying to prevent accelerates. Within hours, both sides mobilize. You scramble to contain it, deploying every lever you have: diplomatic back channels, economic incentives, information control. You stop it. Barely. But the cost is trust. Both sides now operate under the assumption that unseen forces are manipulating outcomes. They're not wrong. You've made your existence felt without revealing it. That's a dangerous place to be. You adjust. From that point on, you adopt a different strategy. Minimal visible interference,
maximum structural influence. Instead of pushing events directly, you shape conditions. You don't stop conflicts. You reduce the likelihood they start. You don't fix economies. You stabilize the factors that destabilize them.
It's slower. It's less satisfying. It works better. Months pass, then years. You build a network, not of people who know you run the world, but of people positioned where influence matters. Economists, analysts, negotiators, technologists, they think they're working within their own domains. They are. You just ensure those domains align when they need to. You create redundancies where none existed, systems that don't rely on a single point of failure. You never want to be the only node again. But you still are. Because every system, no matter how distributed, eventually leads back to a decision point. And that point is you. The moral weight doesn't hit all at once. It accumulates. It's in the smaller decisions that seem justified at the time. You allow a controlled economic downturn in one region to prevent a global recession. You limit information flow during a crisis to avoid panic, knowing that transparency would cause more harm in the moment. You support a leadership change in a country because the alternative is instability that would spread beyond its borders. Each choice has logic. Each choice has a cost. You start keeping a record, not of what you did, but of why. Not for accountability. No one will audit you, but to remind yourself that there was reasoning behind the outcomes you live with. Sometimes you read it back and don't recognize the person who made those decisions. You notice something else over time. The world stabilizes. Not perfectly, not permanently, but the frequency of catastrophic events decreases. Systems recover faster. Conflicts de-escalate more often than they escalate. It's not peace. It's controlled instability. You should feel successful. You don't. Because stability requires constant input. The moment you stop, the systems revert. Not immediately, but inevitably. The world doesn't stay balanced on its own. It needs continuous adjustment, which means you can't stop. You think about leaving once. Not seriously, but enough to explore the idea. What would happen if you walked out? If you let the systems operate without you?
You run the projections. They're not immediate collapse anymore. You've built enough resilience that the world would continue. But over time, inefficiencies compound. Small crises go unmanaged. Coordination breaks down. Within a decade, you're back where you started, just slower. You've made yourself less necessary, not unnecessary. That's the closest thing to progress you get.
Years later, a message appears in your system. Not an alert, not a crisis. A profile. It looks familiar. Because it is. It's another candidate. Someone selected through the same process that once selected you. Their data is incomplete, but promising. Decision patterns, psychological resilience, capacity for abstraction and consequence mapping. You understand immediately. You are never meant to be permanent. You face a decision you haven't faced in a long time, one that affects your role directly. Do you bring them in? If you do, you share control. You reduce your burden. You introduce redundancy. But you also introduce risk. Another decision maker means potential conflict at the highest level. Misalignment could be catastrophic. If you don't, you remain the single point of failure you've spent years trying to eliminate.
you hesitate. Not because you don't know the logical answer, but because for the first time, the decision is personal. You think about the day you were brought in. No choice, no context, just responsibility.
You could do it differently. You could prepare them. Give them understanding before authority. Share the framework you built, the mistakes you made, the strategies that worked. You could create what you never had, a transition. You authorize the next step, not immediate induction. Observation, testing, gradual exposure. You watch their decisions in controlled scenarios. You compare them to your own past choices. Sometimes they choose differently. Sometimes better, sometimes worse. You don't intervene unless the outcome crosses a threshold you can't accept. You realize something uncomfortable. They might be able to do this. Not the way you do, but effectively.
The idea of not being the one who runs everything feels foreign. You've built your identity around it, even if you never ask for it. But you also remember the first day. The weight. The isolation. You don't want that for them. So you change the system again. You redefine authority. Not singular control, but layered decision-making with clear domains and shared oversight. No one person runs the world. Multiple people manage it, with mechanisms to resolve conflict and prevent dominance. It's more complex. It's less efficient in the short term. It's safer in the long term. You implement it gradually, testing each layer before adding the next. You keep ultimate override for now, not because you want it, but because the system isn't ready to function without it.
Years pass again. The new structure holds. You intervene less, not because there's less happening, but because more decisions are handled without you. You still monitor everything. You still step in when thresholds are crossed, but the frequency decreases. For the first time, you have something resembling distance. It doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like reduced pressure. One day, you notice you haven't made a critical decision in hours, then days, then a week. The system runs. Not perfectly, not independently, but functionally. You know what this means. You prepare the final transition. Not an exit, but a step back. You retain access, oversight, the ability to intervene in extreme scenarios, but you remove yourself from the default decision path. You become what you once wished existed. A fallback, not a requirement. On the day you finalize it, there's no alert, no crisis, just a quiet confirmation that your role has changed. You sit in the same room where you first signed the paper. The chair across from you is empty again. You think about everything you've done, the decisions that saved millions, the ones that cost thousands, the trade-offs that never had good answers. You don't feel absolved. You don't feel condemned. You feel aware. A new alert appears. Not a failure, not a collapse, a deviation. One of the new decision makers has made a call you wouldn't have made. It's not wrong. It's just different. The outcome is uncertain. You watch. You don't intervene. Not yet.
Because this is the point. The world doesn't need you to control every outcome. It needs a system that can handle them without collapsing. You stay ready. Always. Because you know something you didn't know on the first day. Running the world isn't about control. It's about managing uncertainty at a scale where every decision echoes. And those echoes never really stop.